SecurePod.
SecurePod.
Welcome to SecurePod by SecureFlag. In this podcast series, we speak with a variety of guests, all of whom have been involved in some way, shape or form in affecting cybersecurity culture change within their organization. Whether it's about building secure development and engineering skills, democratizing threat modeling as a standard practice in the SDLC, creating elite squads of security champions to rally colleagues across the organization, or even creating policy frameworks to enhance cyber skills and awareness across an entire continent, we know you walk away with some useful insight. SecurePod is hosted by me, Nick Kelly, production is by Alessandro Longo, and sound by Adrian Hellenberg. When running an anti-phishing campaign, there's a better way to do it, and then there's an approach that can end up fostering a culture of fear and mistrust, with hoodwinked employees who clicked that link getting the book thrown at them. But security programs shouldn't be about shaming. They should build a culture of trust and education. Cybersecurity training must evolve from isolated tests to continuous learning and more supportive and educational approaches to effectively enhance security awareness among employees. To this point, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA, emphasizes training employees to recognize phishing attempts and providing immediate feedback to reinforce learning. I'm your host of SecurePod, Nick Kelly, and in this episode, we'll explore this and more in a conversation with Marc Punzirudu, CISO of Alogent. Marc has extensive experience in building and managing security programs in organizations. This podcast series focuses on practical examples and lessons from real-world efforts, but also to embed security culture within organizations. Cultural change is never easy, but with the right tools and the best practices like those we'll discuss today, it's absolutely achievable. And Marc's experience is, as I said, extensive, and he was a delight to have on the show. It is always great to catch up with Marc, and before we get stuck into it, if you do enjoy this episode, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And with that, let's get to it. Welcome to SecurePod, the podcast supported by SecureFlag, where we focus on discussions around building a culture of security within organizations. It's a very broad, overarching concept, and then focusing on some of the specifics around that. So now side focusing on secure coding training, automating threat modeling, but a lot of the guests we speak with, we try and understand some of the challenges that they've faced, how they've overcome them, how they've managed to engineer cultures of security within their organization, build security champions programs, and hopefully provide some lessons learned for you beautiful listeners. So welcome to the podcast, Marc. As a brief introduction, I will have already done this in the pre-segment, but Marc Punzirudu is the CISO of Alogent. He has a long track record in managing and building security programs. I will actually let him do his introduction and walk you through a bit of his CV, and then we'll jump straight into it. So again, welcome, Marc.
Oh, thanks for having me, Nick. I've worked in cybersecurity for the better part of 20 years now, say 15. The gray in my beard shows this. I spent the majority of that time working with a variety of customers across lots of industries, financial services, health sciences, and I'd say retail hospitality primarily, everything from pen testing through forensics, through you name it. Now I'm on the other side of the table helping organizations build their program. It's been interesting.
Do you have a preference, or have your preferences evolved as well over time? Either side, the offensive side or the defensive side, or is it an all-in-one type of scenario at the moment?
I think it depends. The grass is always greener at times, but it is nice to focus on a single organization and watch what you develop grow. In professional services, a lot of times you're coming in, you're pointing out what people are doing wrong, and then you're leaving, and then you're maybe coming back and helping them with something else or advisory. You get to see everything. You don't always get to see it finished, though. It's nice. Year over year, acknowledge what you've done.
Yeah, I can see that. There's a bit more distance if you're in the professional services side, whereas this one is more your own concept that you're building and nurturing. It sounds like a very nice segue to focus on the current role that you're in. One of the primary focuses of this podcast is to generate useful examples from people's experiences in building security programs. And again,
as mentioned at the beginning, trying to shift, embed security culture within organizations, which is tough. Cultural change does have a lot of different requirements to actually make a success. So perhaps we can start there. And whether it's your current role or previous roles, even in the professional service side, looking at it from the external side and advising the internal team, or the current role, or maybe a mixture of both, maybe you can walk us through a couple of examples that spring to mind when you're thinking about measures you've taken to engender a culture of change in terms of security within the organization.
It's difficult from either side of the fence when you're talking professional services and you're observing an organization and what they've built. And you very quickly can see what the culture is or isn't because you're usually down in the weeds. You're talking to the developers, you're talking to the team leads. You're able to see the results of all their scans and what their program is. And then coming to build your own, you're dealing with balancing the business objectives along with injecting security. The security and technology are all about assisting the business with meeting its objectives and trying to do it in a secure way, enabling it through technology. And you can't spend all day doing training and seminars. So you do have to find a way to act the parachute as you're jumping out of the plane. And
Yeah.
that's difficult in its own right. You have somebody who's been working for you for 20 years on the same product, fantastic source of knowledge, could be extremely productive, but maybe their habits are from legacy operating systems and legacy methods of doing things. And it's a little bit of an uphill climb, but generally speaking, I think that communication and explaining the why are always really
Mm.
important. Then showing people the benefits after they've made some improvements so that they understand how important it is. I think all those things mixed with the fact that people inherently want to do a good job. Nobody gets out of bed wanting to fail or do a bad job. I think both
Mm.
those things together are the key. You have to have patience, but you also have to be tenacious about it too.
Good points. And when you're talking about nobody wakes up wanting to do a bad job, I guess there's also the concept, say, carrots and sticks. Something that springs to mind is the Microsoft Secure Futures initiative, where they mention that as a result of things, which many listeners may or may not be aware of, but Microsoft recently said they are committed to security first and a number of announcements. There were some catalysts that affected this change. Moving that aside, one of the things that they were talking about and they've written in the Secure Futures initiative is that they will align compensation and there will be a compensation element and an incentive to meet the performance goals set out within the SFI. That is a more stick approach, but I can see the value in that. And I can also see that that would encourage those folks who are getting out of bed, not wanting to do anything wrong, but also having this strong incentive to ensure that they are committed to that as well. And they have extra incentive to achieve those goals. I don't know whether that resonates or whether that's something that you've had experience with as well in different shapes or forms.
The carrot and the stick is a pretty famous approach. I've always, I like to say, I try to not treat security as a hammer.
Yeah.
It's sometimes you do have to. I always favor, especially in the beginning of building any kind of program, is a positive incentive, something
Mm,
extra. And then you have to ensure that you give them the right tools and the right foundation, the right knowledge to be able to meet whatever it is that you're setting out. So kind of
mm,
being able to segue into training and building the training programs. SFI is a wonderful thing if you're willing to ensure that your company has the correct processes and procedures in place, that you have a foundation of, say, security by design. You're doing security architecture in the beginning. You have a
yeah.
governance program in place. There's a lot of moving parts to something like that. And that's a very long term strategy, at least from my perspective.
Yeah.
That's not something I could build in a year and have it be mature and functional. That's something you could start to build in a year. And it may take two or three for you to have all of the pieces worked out. I think it's a
Yeah.
good
Yeah.
goal. It's an excellent goal. But even if you just adopt some of the basic principles, like you have an actual security governance program for application security, and you're doing things like looking at what programming languages are being used and when they're being deprecated and trying to
Mm,
proactively monitor for when you have to upgrade. So, for example, if you use PHP and you were 5.7, which has been gone for a long time, but you know it's going to be end of life in 2 years. your organization has to put aside the time, the money, the resources to proactively move that instead of
Yeah.
waiting until an auditor comes up or vulnerabilities come up. So you have to have commitments from the enterprise to make something like that work.
Yeah, I was going to say that I'm getting that commitment also from the leadership to say, all right, correct me if I'm wrong, but we're going to slightly disrupt because it will be a slight disruption if you add this extra step of governance in the short term. But in the mid to long term, we will be far better in our adherence to our security objectives. Do you find, as a general rule, and probably your experience in professional services would help inform you because you have seen the variety of different customers at different levels of maturity? I guess it would be a mixed bag, right? You'd have some executives saying, yes, we're all for it, we're going to move ahead, and some would be throwing a spanner in the works.
It depends on the size of the company and honestly, who owns it. That's what I find
Yeah.
because whether you're private equity, you're venture, you're privately held by an individual, you're publicly traded, there's different pressures on the business. And there's outliers too. Don't get me wrong. There's could be
Mm,
VC held company that's very security first because of the industry they're in, for example. But that's all over the map. I would say every business is going to err on the side of revenue whenever possible. So building new features, getting new customers, those are the focus a lot of times. The
mm,
ones that have been very successful in trying to put security first and maybe using security as a point, as a market differentiator, even, or they're in maybe a
mm.
highly regulated industry that I like to call them trust industries, where you
Yep.
can't afford to have something like that happen because of what it is that you do. When
Yep.
you're in those sorts of organizations, they do tend to be more proactive and have a dedicated security personnel. There's application
Yeah.
security leaders and team champions that are there to get close to the code and also be an extension of the security office. And so
Yeah.
they're in the weeds. And those are the organizations, they can give you a security roadmap. And if you look at their product roadmap, security's 20%, security maintenance 20, it's up there. It's not a 5,
Mm.
10% thing. It's a 20% thing.
Yeah. I'm reflecting on our own platform as well, and it does take up a huge amount of our internal focuses. And then, of course, I guess that translates into the output that customers receive as part of the platform. Also, another nice segue to look at something which is near and dear to our hearts at Secure Flag, which is secure coding training. A slightly more general than secure coding training we can focus on, but you mentioned at the beginning of the discussion seminars, those types of practices. And I'm curious what you think the best modality is for training and predominantly training from a technical side of things, training developers, training them on techniques to write secure code from the beginning or training them in ways where they can understand why the creation of this particular feature or application comes with an inherent set of risks that they can actually appreciate from the beginning and build and design to mitigate as best possible from the beginning. So, yeah, curious about your reflections about delivering training.
I think the majority of it has to be hands on.
Mm,
Developers live with their hands on a keyboard. So
mm,
that's the life they've chosen. And that
mm.
means they enjoy doing it. And I think that, I know for me, that's the type of learning where I am the most successful is hands on doing the actual job. So a hands on lab. But you also have to acknowledge that that's not how everybody learns. Not everybody is a
Yeah.
hands on learner. So combination, I think, where there's some reading, there's some video, nothing too heavy, and there's some hands-on to help with the application provides a little something for everybody. Some sort of options, I think, are critical because you have to account for the different learning styles. But it'd be hard pressed for me to not say that they need to walk the walk. And what's
Yeah.
nice about secure coding and secure code training is that you can measure, you can take the body of someone's work and you can show them that,
Mm,
for example, they spent 15% of their time and productivity last year fixing things
mm.
that they had previously written because of a security reason, and then show them this year that they didn't spend that time. You can provide real metrics to show someone how they're being more efficient and effective. And that's very
Mm.
positive. Who doesn't like to get good news like, hey, you did so much better this year and you didn't have to do all this extra work? Always easier to
Yeah.
do it right the first time.
Oh, it is, yeah. Using a completely non-technical example, my Italian, whenever I have to fiddle around with a sentence, which if I spoke it absolutely fluently would take me 2 minutes, it would take me a couple more variations and asking Google Translate, why is this correct and why is this not? Yeah, it's a lot of fiddly work. And if I didn't make the initial grammatical mistakes in the first place, but I'm assuming that most of our audience is au fait with the text. So there's really good examples. And when you actually show them the tangible benefits and say you saved X amount of hours, that also translates into a very healthy argument for the executive as well, because they're interested in the number of hours that are spent on productive work as opposed to retroactive, quote unquote, redundant work. It would be security rework in that sense. When you're talking about more of an awareness aspect, you were saying that a light touch approach is generally, in the beginning at least, of the program, something that you favor. How do you feel the reception is when you're talking to people who aren't, say, technical? Program managers, management administration, those types of folks. Maybe there's more of a security awareness campaign that they're used to, phishing simulations. What are your general thoughts about those types of programs? And are they mixed bag successes? Do you see the same kind of metrics being furnished or being present when they're able to say, all right, well, I've clicked X less phishing links this year in this phishing simulation? How do you find those programs and how have you found those programs in general in your instances?
Oh, that's a mixed bag. It's much harder to administer, I believe, a general security awareness training campaign than secure coding. Secure
Yeah.
coding, you're speaking to material that people know. You're taking a .NET course and you're a .NET developer. So it's
Yeah.
tied to some kind of knowledge when you do phishing campaigns. I want to be slightly controversial and say that I don't think that phishing campaigns and phishing training and testing, and I'm not a fan of any of it.
Yeah.
And a lot of people will say the opposite, but I don't feel that trying to trick your employees, which is what that is a good way to train and test. But you do have to expose them to the
Yeah.
concept. It is important to train and teach. Like the way that I've always looked at it is instead of sending someone a phishing email, and then if they click on the link, there's a punitive action, which is really popular in a lot of phishing platforms. Now you have to do this training. Or now we
Mm,
send an email to your managers and we let everyone know that you're the dirty one that would have brought down the whole company. You shame them. And that's the
yeah.
opposite of what you're trying to do. You can get reports and things up through executive leadership on who's doing what, so you can coach them to the side. But I think it's
Mm,
important that what you do when someone clicks a phishing link is you need a platform that's going to explain to them real time feedback, what they should have looked for. Unfortunately, click a phishing email. If everything's okay, this is a corporate sponsored phishing email. Don't worry about calling IT and your boss. However, in the future, look for these things. I think that approach is critical when you're doing that. Like it's the hammer and the nail, the carrot and the stick. When I would see someone in a past life send a phishing email out that had to do with their payroll provider or coronavirus was the worst one. A lot of these types of topics, I'll recognize that those are topics an attacker would use. And those phishing contexts and emails are ones that would get used in real life. But you're the employer trying to teach them. You're not trying
mm.
to fool them. So I think that that's where I take issue with phishing more often than not. But I think you got to keep it positive.
Yeah, 100% agree. Someone posted something on LinkedIn who talks regularly about those types of simulations. And it does seem like a very passive aggressive approach. Even if there's a nice way of saying you messed up, it's baiting. Can you think of any interesting lessons learnt or challenges that you face that you've overcome when building a program?
The worst, I think the most important thing you could do when you're building a program is in the very beginning, you have to have an actual plan. You have to have
Mm,
an actual sponsor who is going to own
mm,
it, who is going to run it, who is going to maintain it. And you have to have real executive buy in. If you don't
yeah,
have actual executive buy in, you're wasting all your time and money, and you shouldn't. My opinion, it's not worth the time and energy. You have to formally define these things. And then you have to keep those people informed as to the progress and work with them on a regular basis and manage and monitor it. I mean, you treat it like a baby. You brought a
yeah.
baby home, you have to poke your head in every couple hours to make sure they're all right. You have to feed them, you have to change them.
Mm,
You've got to do all the things. And then as it grows, it starts to take care of itself. It starts to be
Yeah.
able to do more on its own. It doesn't need as much care and feeding. That's the approach you have to take. It's my personal opinion. If you don't, the program will fail, or you're only going to
Yeah.
get a small percentage of the return that you're looking for. So you have to be realistic about the amount of time you can dedicate to it and grow it over time.
Yeah.
You can't go from 0 to 100 in a week.
If you wind back to that initial conversation that you're having to gain that executive buy-in, I guess it can go two ways. If you have a receptive executive committee that is open to ideas, then that's one thing. If you have a very closed executive committee, like you were mentioning in one of the previous examples, then it's probably going to be too difficult at that time. But let's say you have a receptive board, executive committee, CEO, other maybe non-technical executive who you do need on site, CFO, whichever role they may occupy. How does that conversation look in the beginning?
I'm very fortunate in that we have a very progressive, very on board, I would say, receptive executive leadership team here. Can't always say that you have. I'm really quite pleased with that. And I found that as long as you have documented your business plan, for me, when I'm going to pitch something, I put my sales hat on. I do it
Yeah.
with either
Yeah.
kind of audience, but whether I have a new, I'm going to purchase a secure coding platform, I'm going into that like I'm an account executive. And I quite literally and saying, here is the scope, here's the reason, here's my objectives, here's the cost benefit analysis, here's what I'm hoping to get out of it in a 3-year thing, here's what the cost is. And here are thoughts on managing cost and expectations. Here's how much time it's going to take per individual.
Yeah.
Or I break it all out, try to visually show what we're trying to do and why. And I want my passion come through. It's literally sales. Although what you're selling is not a product or a program, well, what you're
Mm.
selling is a positive outcome for the business. So it's a different approach to the same problem.
I love that last bit, and obviously very thankful for your time as well, and also your passion for secure coding training. We at Secure Flag, that's our primary focus, as you well know, same as threat modeling automation. I think we could go on for quite some time, I'm sure. Last question, and this is sorry if it sounds like a bit of an interview. We were jesting at the beginning of the call about how some podcasts can emerge like that, but I have a number of burning questions that I felt I wanted to ask. At Secure Flag, we focus on secure coding training. We built a threat modeling automation tool called ThreatCanvas. The concept was to basically democratize a process, a practice which is typically performed by not developers, but more application security engineers, that type of thing. Do you see threat modeling nowadays becoming a higher priority for organizations as they understand that this is a very, very useful tool to actually implement? And what are your impressions on implementing it in current or previous organizations?
So it's actually it's a hard sell in the beginning
Yeah.
because folks don't understand hey, you need to add additional time into what you're doing, maybe slow down a product enhancement hitting actual development queue to do a security
Mm,
architecture review the correct way, do threat modeling, understand what you're doing. But the way to talk about it, to change the hearts and minds, is you can't focus on all things security everywhere at the same level and expect to ever finish anything. There's too much.
yeah.
If you look at the CISO mind map, for example, there's 100 and some odd things on there. And
Yeah,
you can't
it's a
focus.
ton.
It's so daunting. And when you go to just application security between OWASP and ASVS and all the other everythings under the sun, if you're using 5 different programming languages, there's an infinite amount of area to be error prone or cause a security problem. You can
Mm,
run every security tool on earth against your code base and still not find everything. It's tough, but when you demonstrate maybe with a proof of concept, let me show you. So I'll use ThreatCanvas as an example because to me it's amazing. I think what you guys have done
mm,
has been phenomenal. But one of the hardest parts of threat modeling has been coming up with accurate diagrams and then associating the threats to the right interfaces on those diagrams. So
yeah.
if you're thinking just UML in general and you've mapped this whole application out, one, how do you know your map's correct? Two, it's technically the beginning of a data flow diagram, which is something that a lot of companies don't have for their applications to begin with. So it's
Yeah. Yeah.
providing saving a lot of man hours of trying to draw that. But then most importantly, it's giving you at least a baseline of where to focus what type of security. I have a web interface that's over here that speaks directly to a SQL server. And since there's a subset of risk that is much higher or likely to cause an impact to the organization based on the technologies and how you're using them, when you can accurately and quickly threat model something, which is where something like ThreatCanvas comes into play, it allows you to save a ton of time and effort so that you can reduce the most risk to the fastest. You're never going to be perfect, and you still have to give all the other areas of security consideration. But if I can concentrate on 5 of the OWASP top 10, extra special in this one area of the app and bring that risk down 80%, that's a quick win. And I think that ROI there is, it's a little bit gray to develop, but you can definitely associate an ROI with that. Makes it very interesting to the business.
Yeah, that's a very lovely point to end on, and appreciate the very nice thoughts and words about ThreatCanvas. We lots of tears and broken keyboards to get there. We are getting a lot of good feedback about that. And I think that was the entire point, basically to not impact time, but give you a very good understanding and representation of where to focus on initially. We're basically running up to time now, and I've really appreciated the conversation. It has been really interesting from my side. Any parting words from you prior to us turning the mics off?
No, I would just say that if secure coding and application security falls into your purview and you're listening to this podcast, not every day is going to be great, but it can be. It's a wild ride. Everything changes so rapidly.
Yeah.
It's something that if you enjoy, keep at it. And if you don't, there's a lot of domains in security that maybe aren't quite as fast moving, but it takes a lot of effort. But it's very rewarding because you can very quickly see the impact of what you've done. So it's, to me, I find application security to be one of the most interesting, if not the most interesting areas of all the domains of security. So if you like it or love it.
Beautiful, wise words, Mark. Thank you so much. Really appreciate the time, and you have a great rest of your day.
All right, Nick, you too.
SecurePod. SecurePod. SecurePod.